This is Validation Science, Unit 1, Quality and Reg Affairs, and we are on Lesson 5. This lesson is about the regulations. The overview of this lesson: how do the regulations get implemented on a site? What are the European regulations? What are the US or the FDA regulations? And where do the ICH guidelines fit into all of that? So what to do versus how to do it. The regulations that we're going to be talking about tell us the what to do. They don't tell us how to do, so they give the minimum standards at a fairly high level. They have maximum flexibility in them, so they might say something like a site must have a procedure to address control of standards, but they won't tell you how you go about putting that in place. It's specific enough to address problems. For example, things like penicillin, there's extreme requirements to keep penicillin controlled due to the fact that a lot of people would be very allergic to it, so you can't have crossover into other processes or other manufacturing lines. It's technology neutral, so it doesn't tell you what technology you should use to comply with the regulations, just what you need to do. And they're scalable as well. For the how to do things, we need to have standard operating procedures in place, or SOPs. SOPs are derived from the regulations, and they're documented instructions on all aspects of the manufacturing. Every site would have hundreds of SOPs in place detailing how you do every calibration, how you fill out every piece of document, what validations would be required, what cleaning procedures are required, what training personnel are required to do, what quality systems they have in place. SOPs are clear, they're very concise, they should be written in a very logical way so that everybody would have the same understanding of it, so there's no ambiguity in them. They should be very instructional, so it should be really clear what you're expected to do. They would always be approved by the relevant and the subject matter expert in the area. So a validation SOP would be approved by someone in the validation team. It would also be approved then by the quality team as well. And they are controlled, so you have to make sure that the SOPs that you have are actually always of the most current nature. So they have to be controlled, so you have to be sure that you're using the most current SOP available at a time. The European regulations are called the EUDRELEX, Volume 4, Good Manufacturing Practices of GMP Guidelines. It's not something that rolls off the tongue very easily, but that's what we have in Europe. The EUDRELEX is a collection of rules and regulations governing medicinal products in the European Union. All the regulatory bodies in Europe use these regulations, so the likes of HPRA, our own regulatory body here in Ireland, MHRA at the moment for the UK, depending on how Brexit goes, that may change down the line. There's similar information to the US regulations, but they're in a different format, and occasionally there are differences between the requirements for both. The EUDRELEX consists of 10 volumes. If you want to click on this link here, you can get to the EUDRELEX website and you can have a look through how they're organized and what kind of content is in them. So I'd highly recommend you doing that. There will be a link in your appendix section also for that. So the volume 4 of the GMPs, they are based in 3 different parts, and part 1 has the basic requirements for medicinal products. So it's broken down into 9 chapters. The first chapter is pharmaceutical quality system, the second is personnel, the third one is premises and equipment, the fourth one is documentation, number 5 is production, number 6 is quality control, 7 is outsourced activities, so where you're contracting out testing, for example, in your labs. Number 8 is complaints and product recalls, and number 9 is about self-inspections. When you look at the EUDRELEX, then you see you've got EUDRELEX here, your title, volume number 4, you've got your title, what it is, the EU Guidelines for Good Manufacturing Practices. You also have a number of annexes, so the annexes are really useful and there's quite a lot of information, and those you'd probably want to get familiar with. This, for example, is Annex 15, and the title of Annex 15 is Qualification and Validation, and then it gives you the section as well. So in this particular annex, for example, it gives you organising and planning for qualification and validation. So all qualification and validation activities should be planned and take the life cycle of the facilities, equipment, utilities, process and product into consideration. And it also says qualification and validation activities should only be performed by suitably trained personnel who follow approved procedures. So you can see here how it gives you a very high level requirement of what it is that you need to do, and your site procedure, your standard operating procedure on site would give you the detail as to how each company and each manufacturing site would implement that requirement. So this just gives you the full layout of the EUDRELEX. It's very small, so if you click onto the website that you've got the link for, you can see it better. But you've got the introduction, which tells you about the directives that it comes from that have been approved by the European Union. And you've got part 1, the basic requirements, the 9 chapters that we just talked about. Part 2 then is your requirements for active substances, and part 3 has got things like your site master file in it. So you can have a look over that again. In the United States, we have the FDA guidelines. So these are the same, but just written in a slightly different way. They tend to be more written in more of a legal format. So the act in the US is passed in the Congress about the manufacturing environment. So it's the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act. and the guidelines are presented as the Code of Federal Regulations, which we've talked about in previous lessons, and the FDA police this act. So I mentioned before that the FDA are actually responsible for numerous different types of manufacturing. They are in charge of food and tobacco, just to name a couple of different things that they're in charge of. So they have quite a wide remit. The part of the regulations that the FDA have that apply to pharmaceuticals and biopharmaceuticals are 210 and 211. They're the ones that we're really interested in. So you'll see 21 Part 210, 211. So that's current good manufacturing practices in manufacturing, processing, packing or holding of drugs. And the second one is current good manufacturing for finished products. So you can click on the links here and you can get more information about those, which again, I'd highly recommend that you do so you familiarize yourself with the layout and the type of content that they have in them. So this is what their website looks like. And you can do a search or you can go through it like that. So when you break it down, you'll see some of the sections here. You've got 210, which is general, 211, finished products, finished pharmaceuticals, 216, pharmacy compounding, 225, medicated feeds, 226, type A medicated articles, part 600 to 680, biologics, because this would be a newer part of the regulations, 820 is medical device, quality systems regulations, and 1271, human cells, tissues, and cellular and tissue-based products. Part 211, the bit that we're the most familiar with, has different subparts associated with it, so it helps if you want to look something up. Generally, the index in the CFRs is also really useful. If you go to the back of the book, you can look up validation, for example, and it will give you all the instances where validation is mentioned in the regulations. So subpart A is your general provisions, B is your organisation and personnel, so what requirements you have for the people you hire, putting job descriptions in place and training in place for them. C is the buildings and facilities, so how you maintain them, what standards they need to be of. They'll have things like they have to be non-shedding and non-additive to a process. Your equipment, again, the type of equipment you have, how you need to calibrate it and maintain it, what procedures you should have. Control of components and drug product containers and closures. These are obviously really important, again, for a mix of risks of mix-ups or contamination. They need to be closely controlled and monitored. Production and process controls, then how you manage your process, what SOPs you need to have in place, what standards you need to have set up. Packaging and labelling controls, holding and distribution. Your laboratory controls, then what are the requirements around the labs. Records in your reports, and returns and salvage drug products. So if you're going to be able to rework products that were failed initial testing, or if you've got stuff that is sent back to you, what do you do with it? So the CFRs, again, they look similar and they're broken down into quite useful sections, so it's easy to navigate your way around them. So you've got your subpart. So subpart F in this case here, we've got part 211, we've got subpart F, and in this one the title is the production and process controls, and it's section 211.131. So this tells you where you are in the regulations. So they're all very well indexed. And the title of this subsection then is control of microbial contamination. So you can see the way that the CFRs are written, they're a lot more written in legal language. The EU regulations tend to be a little bit less wordy. So it says appropriate written procedures designed to prevent objectionable microorganisms in drug products, not required to be sterile, shall be established and followed, and appropriate written procedures designed to prevent microbial contamination of drug products purporting to be sterile shall be established and followed. Such procedures shall include validation of all aseptic and sterilization processes. So you see again, it's quite high level what you need to do. It's not prescriptive in any way. And you can click on here and have a look through the CFRs. The ICH, the International Conference of Harmonisation, which we mentioned before, we went through this slide in one of our previous lessons. So their guidances are broken down into the quality guidelines, the safety, the efficacy, and then the multidisciplinary ones as well. And this is just a few of them here. So you've got your ich.org and again your QSEM, that's how they are broken down and how they're indexed. And just to give you an example, there's a couple of them here, 6A, so it tells you what they are and how to find them. The ICH have a good manufacturing practice guide for active pharmaceutical ingredients. So this has been brilliant because it is one guidance document for API sites to use instead of having to worry about both the EUDRLEX and the CFRs. The ICH Q7 gives a lot of detail and covers a lot of the requirements for active pharmaceutical ingredients. There's 19 sections and it's specific for API manufacturing only, and it's for human drugs only. So the ICH guidelines, we've got stability, analytical procedures, validation, impurities and new drug substances, pharmacopoeias, which we'll be talking about later on, and the annexes associated with that, biotechnology products in Q5, Q6, the specifications, Q7 is the active ingredient guide we talked about, Q8, Q9 and 10 we mentioned already as being the big game changers for the pharmaceutical industry, where the regulations are moving to a more proactive, inclusive mode rather than the prescriptive mode of the past, where you have risk assessment, quality systems in your design space. Q11 is your development of manufacturing drug substances, and 12 is your life cycle management. So you can click on here onto this link, and again it'll be in your index section, and you can have a look through the ICH guidelines, and again I would really recommend that you do that. So to recap, the EUDRLEX, the European regulations, and they're used by all of the regulatory bodies across Europe, including our own HPRA. The CFR are the Code of Federal Regulations, and they are used by the US operators, the FDA. The ICH guidelines are the International Conference of Harmonization, and you'll remember those are based with industry groups across the world, including FDA and European Union, and also industry groups, and they are used by all signatory countries. Other guidelines you might have come across and you might hear about: the ICH Q7, which we've already talked about. The World Health Organization will have some good manufacturing practices for pharmaceuticals also, and sometimes you'll hear of the PICS, so the Pharmaceutical Inspection Convention and Pharmaceutical Inspection Cooperation Scheme, the PICS guidelines, so it's worth again to have a quick look at those. And this is what their website looks like. So over to you, let's check your understanding. So what is the EUDRLEX? What are the CFRs? What are ICH guidelines?